A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. That honors the apostles and elders, great millstone, for teaching us the truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Rukwai. I'm back in here with another quick on Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to do a comparison of childhoods, childhoods of the king known as Alexander the Great, and we're just comparing it to the way a lot of us, us as being Israelites growing up, whether it be in America or different respective areas, and just doing a bit of comparison and just to show A, the importance of childhood, B, showing the importance of women in order, right? And C, the importance of knowing our own culture and history, right? And a lot of those little bits and pieces were lost, to show that, all those pieces are very, very, essentially are important because it shows and it plays a huge role in children's development when they grow older and how they operate, right? And what's more and more time again, like when you look at these different examples of these different YNs, whether they're breaking into jewelry stores, going into malls and causing a ruckus, it shows you more and more time again, and even how they deal with authority, more and more time again, you start to see that a lot of these YNs are a byproduct of bad nurturing and bad culture, bad parenting. You see what I'm saying? So what I wanted to do real quick is to read a little bit about Alexander the Great and his unusual upbringing, right? So this was an article that I found, and I kind of just wanted to read this to show you the sharp contrast between a lot of us, how we grow up. I'm talking about in the earthly sense, not really in the spiritual sense, right? And how Alexander the Great grew up, right? And he's one of the kings that you read about, in First Maccabees, the first chapter, that's smitten Darius the Mede, right? And so I just wanted to go through a little bit about his upbringing because he was written of and spoken of in the book of Daniel, right? So this is on a website known as the Trumpet, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this here in regards to his childhood. So it says Alexander the Great was born in 356 BC in the city of Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia. His parents were Philip II and Olympias of Epirus. From his father, it says Alexander learned the art and science of warfare, but historians agree that his mother was a far more influential in his life. From her, Alexander inherited a profound love for learning and also a fiery, sometimes ruthless nature. During his early years, it says that Alexander's mother constantly told him that he was part God, right? So it shows you already the importance of nurturing. It shows you the importance of having a mother that's also constantly encouraging. This is a lot of information. It shows you the importance, like now we're older, growing up, being properly rehabilitated, so we can think, more highly of ourselves. Cultivating healthy self-esteem, because we went years, a long, long time, believing that we were a bunch of degenerates, believing a bunch of bywords and these different words that were normally called, because those words are basically a dim vibration, believing that we were 3/5 of a human, believing that we were not capable of anything, right? Believing that our history just started when we were pulled into slaves in Africa, or we were just in huts And then, a lot of you so-called Native Americans, you were just, dwelling, on the land, and then, you just got pulled into reservation schools, and we didn't do anything of ingenuity. We haven't done anything of innovation. This is why knowing, our history is so and super duper important, right? Because it shows you that you have templates of different things where we've done and made certain accomplishments, right? And this is one of the things that our people don't, you know, um, as a matter of fact, let me get this precept. A lot of our people don't regard the importance of knowing their history. And when they hear it, they scoff at it. Mm. Okay, this is Job chapter 8 verse 8. And it says, For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. Right? And we're a nation that is essentially fatherless. We don't have a lot of our fathers. A lot of us grew up without our fathers in the household. And a lot of that is because of Esau. He doesn't get away with it, because he systematically took the fathers out of the household, right? And then left the burden of responsibility to be placed more on the mother, and bamboozled, a lot of our women, and bamboozled a lot of our mothers, right? And without that information that was, given onto her, she's giving what little bit of information, right? And passing that information on to the children, right? So a lot of our children don't actually grow up with a healthy sense of self-esteem, self-respect, proper culture. It's just little specks and pieces of remnants of it, right? But it's not in full and entirety, because we don't understand our culture and where we came from, right? So let me go back to the article here. So here it says her family had long claimed to be the descendants of Achilles, the demigod. It says at one point she even told him that his true father was Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, right? Of course, Achilles was a myth, Zeus was fiction, and Alexander was a mortal man like any other. But nonetheless, those teachings affected young Alexander. He believed that he was the descendant of Achilles, and this prompted him to study everything he could about mythological demigod, his supposed ancestor, right? So it shows you also the importance of good nurturing, regardless of the fact that, yes, he was a heathen, but it shows you the importance of childhood and upbringing, because now he's in an environment where he's, hearing this information, is giving him the urgency to actually learn more about, these different, his so-called, I put it in quotations, quote unquote ancestors, making himself more well-rounded, right? And it's the same thing when you think about us, in a sense, because now we're becoming more and more well-rounded by learning about our forefathers, waking up to this understanding. But I'm just reading this to show a very strong contrast into a lot of the ways we grow up, whether it be in Babylon the Great, also known as America, and our respective tribes where we were scattered, right? Because a lot of us didn't grow up with this understanding, and it's shown more and more time again. We're kind of like in rehabilitation to take away a lot of these different, demons, to take away a lot of these different, so-called childhood traumas. Like, we're traumatized. You understand, like, a lot of, and this is a crazy thing too. A lot of these other nations don't like to hear when we complain about our trauma. The first thing they tell us to do is, to disregard it, because what does it do? It provides a sense of shameful spewing among them, especially upon Esau. right? They don't like to hear about it. That's why you have Trump, for example, trying to get rid of certain artifacts and certain periods of history, because they understand that those periods of history are essentially examples of shameful spewing upon them and upon their nation. They don't want to have that being taught to us, because it's essentially it's a stain onto them. It's a stain on a white garment onto them, right? They want to present themselves to be the angels of light, to be the beacon of righteousness. But that shows in more and more time again, when the history is there and the receipts are there, that is not particularly the case, right? So let me go back here. '22. This is Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, and it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," right? So it shows you the way Alexander was being brought up. He was being brought up in and having this understanding of who he was. He was so-called part God, and we're the ones who are gods, right? Yeah, I think even Yahushua even said that in not Matthew. I'm sorry. It was John, I believe, in the 10th chapter, right? We are gods. We are the children of the Most High, right? Lowercase g, right? But we are those people that are gods, and we've gone many, many years without having that understanding. Let me get that. Hold on. This is Psalms 82 and 6, and it says, "Yet I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes," right? So, this is our status, right? We're not saying that we're the Most High, but we are the people of the Scriptures. We are those royal people that was set apart, right? That were given laws, statutes, and commandments, and we are stronger than all these other nations. The other nations are as nothing. And we don't grow up, again, going back to the childhood, we don't grow up having this understanding, knowing that we're better than the other nations, that we're stronger, that we're very intelligent, that we're very beautiful, that we're very capable, that we're very confident. You know what I'm saying? And then a lot of that is because of it shows you the power of heritage. It shows you the power of culture, because then you don't know these things and know about the different accomplishments of your forefathers, you're not going to think you've done anything. And this is the end result of how a lot of us grew up, and a lot of our people grow up, because they're still in that dead state, that dry bone state, not knowing that they've done anything. They think their accomplishments just go back to, for example, whether it be like civil rights or American Indian movement, and maybe it's sparse. Like, so maybe here and there they might know something about, prior to 1600s or whatever. When it comes to knowing our history, our people, they're essentially, a lot of them don't care. The scriptures say that an ox knoweth his owner, and an ass his master's crib. But our people don't know, and our people don't consider. They don't consider, where they come from, and it's a strong tie to Africa and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of, essentially, what Paul describes. There is a lot of strongholds upon the minds of our people because of the filthy philosophies and the filthy wine that they're drinking, whether it be in these different schools. And they never think they've done anything. And on top of that, Esau has also a very strong hand in that, because also you live in a society where everything is kind of like turned upside down. So, for example, when you go to churches, these spiritual institutions, our people don't see the true image and the true essence of the Savior, right? His image is essentially X'd out here because of iconoclasm, which is a breaking and a defacing of the images. And Esau is very has a very strong hand in that. When they think about the Savior, they think about a so-called white person with long stringy dog hair, right, blue eyes, very overly feminine, and when you look at the different Renaissance art, you don't see our people don't see themselves, right? I'll give you a good example real quick. If you type in German tapestry, I believe it's around the 1400 AD, right? If you type that in, what you'll see an image of so-called dark-skinned people inside the castle, right? And then you see outside, you see a bunch of pale-face, so-called white people outside the castle who are barefooted. This is a real tapestry, a real German tapestry you can look up for yourself, right? I'm just using that as an example because a lot of people don't know those things. Nor, like I said earlier, they don't consider these things, right? So let me finish up, this quick article here. It says in his adult years, Alexander even carried a copy of Homer's Iliad, which chronicles Achilles' conquests. He slept with the book under his pillow every night and carried it with him into battle, right? So that was kind of like his own sword. So like, for example, like how when we have this understanding, we carry, our sword with us, our spiritual sword with us, right? To remember the ways of our forefathers, how they handled certain situations. Because when you look at a lot of the situations a lot of our, young men and women get into, they get devoured by their enemy because one, they don't know their enemy, two, they don't know who they are, and then three, they don't know how to fight. This is Alexander the Great, an actual warrior going into battle and how to fight, right? Like we're in a situation where we're trying to learn how to spiritually, dodge, block, defend ourselves, strike, right? Using our spiritual sword, right? Using the scriptures and utilizing the history. That's why the history, again, is so super duper important, and knowing the ways of our forefathers and knowing the things that they did that exemplified righteousness, and knowing the things that, even the mistakes they made too, right? Those are all very, very important to be, because it arms yourself with different tactics of how to maneuver in the valley of the shadow of death, right? Because that we're surrounded by the enemy, right? The scriptures say, turn thou, O Jacob, that thou mayest be illuminated. Be illuminated is not a bad thing. It gives you understanding of how to actually maneuver, in this cesspool, how to maneuver around these different heathens, right? And this is the way I'm just reading this and showing the parallels, and the contrast, especially the contrast between his childhood and a lot of the ways we grew up. Another thing also, a lot of us grew up with a very poor self-image and self-esteem. A lot of it is because we grew up in certain situations where our women strongly believed in the feminist movement, and a lot of that it has caused essentially discord between the man and the woman, right? And I'm saying this also to say that a lot of us grew up thinking that, because we normally might hear growing up, for example, niggas ain't shit, black men ain't shit, this man ain't shit, and that and that dims your vibration, that dims your what little precious confidence you have, with that little self-esteem that you have, right? So this truth is really about also rehabilitation, about thinking of yourself a lot differently than how you thought about yourself before, walking in a particular different way, right? The scriptures say that, a man shall be known by his walk, right? You're just being, you're being reborn again, and you're feeding and drinking the milk and so on and so forth, because we went years without any of this understanding. Okay, so let's just continue here. Okay, let me go to this is Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my power commanded me, that ye shall do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Conduct. Very, very important. Going back to the way we conduct ourselves, knowing who we are, because we don't conduct ourselves as niggas, spics, and stop calling yourself these things. Stop entertaining thoughts of essentially, stop entertaining negative self-talk. It's just doing you very little good. Discipline a lot of those thoughts that come in and making you think that you're less of a person. No, you're not. You're not that at all. You're not some Pookie and some Ray, selling a rock on the side of the road or whatever. You're an upright individual, right? Scriptures say that the person that fears the Lord, they're an honorable seed, an honorable plant, to roughly paraphrase, right? It says, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear to these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, right? This is our wisdom, leaning upon the ways the Lord instructed us to be, right? So I wanted to get, hold on, let me just read this last part here. Another important detail of Alexander's upbringing is that he was personally taught by the famous Aristotle. It says, which was he was a philosopher, and it says, and among the subjects Aristotle taught him was the Hebrew language, right? So that's that's interesting. That's very important too, and that's one of the things, coming back to this truth, it gives you understanding of, it makes you more well-rounded, right? And this is how we're supposed to be, as because a lot of our women look down upon us because they think, all we do provide is something of economic benefit, right? And honestly, a man would provide some financial benefit, but he's not limited. But our women are so bamboozled into thinking that our men are just supposed to only provide some financial benefit. That is where they lack understanding, right? And this is why I kind of have this post here, because you're not supposed to, a child is supposed to have a lot more than just, the so-called financial, the carnal aspect of riches, the spiritual aspect of riches. It shows more and more time again, as time goes on, and the way you see Trump handling a lot of these YNs, and a lot of these are on these Israelites, whether they be in Chicago or Oregon or wherever, it shows you what they lack is really spiritual understanding, because they don't understand their enemy, right? They don't understand themselves. That's the bigger issue here. So, hold on. I was thinking about this account. Okay, this is Luke chapter 2, verse 42, and I read down to 46, and it says, "And when he was 12 years old," speaking of Yahushua, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast, which was the Passover. And it says, "And when they fulfilled the days and returned, the child Yahushua tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass, after the 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all they that heard him were astonished at his answers. Were astonished at his understanding at answers. And it just shows you the vibration that Yahushua, was on at a very, very young age, because, and then you think about the way, when you think about, and then you parallel that with 12-year-olds today, there is a strong contrast because, they don't have the kind of understanding, that they don't the understanding doesn't even pale in comparison, right? Our people's understanding is merely of things of a low vibration, of a low culture. They don't they don't have, they're surrounded and bombarded, with all these different programs on, social media, TikTok and so on and so forth, and it's not giving them a well-rounded understanding of who they are as a whole, right? Look at what I was reading about Alexander the Great. He had certain tutors giving him guidance, giving him understanding in regards to, different languages. He was becoming very well-rounded. Yahushua was very, knowledgeable. You know what I'm saying? Even at a very, very young age. Let me get this last example. First, because this is the importance of culture, and then reading these things, it kind of invokes you to constantly kind of like, want to know more, for you to become more knowledgeable, right? The scriptures say that wisdom is the principal thing, right? And with all that getting, get understanding. This is 1 Kings 4, verse 29, and it says, "And the Most High gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and the wisdom of all of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman and Chalcol, and Darda the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005." And it says, "And he spake of the trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop which springeth out of the wall. He spake also of beasts, of the fowl, and the creeping things, and of the fishes," right? So he was very, Solomon was, and that's one of the things he prayed for when you go back into the earlier chapter. He prayed for wisdom, and he had understanding of all these different, these different things, right? And it shows you because when you look at, it's the same dynamic basically when you come into the understanding, and like, you're able to kind of share bits and pieces of little things. You might have conversations with people here and there, and they're very astonished at your answers, just like how a lot of those people were astonished at Yahushua's answers, right? So I'm just reading this to show you an example, it shows you the importance of heritage, culture, being raised up, knowing who you are, right? And then knowing that you're not just some 3/5 of a human, that negative self-talk that you might have, get that, rebuke those thoughts, man. Those thoughts are not, don't entertain those thoughts, because they don't provide you with any good. It provides with very, very little good, right? By understanding our history and knowing the righteousness and the examples of righteousness that our forefathers, exemplified, right? And we went so long without knowing this history, right? So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but I sincerely pray and hope, this lesson was edifying. But just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. Until next time, I say Shalom.